5 German shepherds were abandoned inside a rusty container, waiting for death in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. There was not a single shadow of a human around them. Only water, fear, and silence surrounded them. They did not bark, nor did they cry. They had no strength left to call for help. They trembled, waiting for either a miracle or the end. Yet fate was not done with them. Somewhere, thousands of kilometers away from their sight, something was drifting against the current. The old rusted container, shaped by the corrosion of metal and some unseen force, remained intact. No one knew how it got there, or how long it had been adrift. But inside that metal box, there were secrets the ocean had hidden for years. 5 German shepherds. Once full of vitality, these dogs had been bred for strength, intelligence, and loyalty. But now they lay on the cold steel floor, their ribs protruding, eyes vacant, their bodies frail. Fear, urine, and the stench of seawater filled the air. There was no food, no water, no light. Only each other remained. They huddled together, sharing warmth, holding on to each other as if it were the last thread keeping them alive. They didn't understand what went wrong. They couldn't fathom why the hands that once fed them had locked them away. They shouldn't have been in this situation. One of the dogs, the oldest, still wore a collar. It was a torn and weathered collar with the name Ryu written on it. Ryu licked the wounds of the others, shared his body heat, and continued to bark towards the empty void until his voice faltered into silence. But hope, when stretched too long, becomes cruel. Even Ryu began to lose hope. Then they heard a sound, a mechanical noise like distant thunder. Something was approaching. Days, perhaps weeks had passed since their last contact. Their ears twitched, their eyes opened. They no longer had the strength to bark, but in their souls, a faint cry for survival echoed. It was the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force. They weren't searching for anything special, just conducting their routine patrol, checking for debris, monitoring illegal activities, and inspecting battle zones. But what they found was beyond anything in their manuals. Something was drifting in the water. At first, they thought it was part of a sunken vessel, but as they drew closer, they noticed subtle movements. Tails, paws. Was that a dog? Takeshi Yamada, a member of the crew, froze for a moment. His heart skipped a beat. He looked through the binoculars, leaning forward. In that instant, memories came rushing back. Another German shepherd from a mission 5 years ago in Afghanistan. The dog that saved his life. The sword of a loyal companion. The dog that took a bullet for him. He had buried it with tears in his eyes, holding its medal. Now 5 faces inside a container were staring back at him, eyes wide with fear, waiting. Lower the rescue boat, right now. No one questioned the order, but someone pointed out something in the water, a dark shape with a dorsal fin. A shark. A large tiger shark, perhaps. There was a moment of hesitation, but Takeshi was different. Without even taking off his boots, he jumped into the rescue boat. Despite the shark circling, he steered towards the container. The sound of weak claws scraping metal confirmed that the dogs were still alive. When he opened the door, what he saw shattered him. 5 skeletal dogs, covered in fur, lying motionless. They didn't bark or growl. They just looked at him as if asking, "Are you real?" They did not run. They did not move. They still did not believe it. But when he extended his hand, Ryu slowly licked it, as if to say, "I trust you." That was enough. He gently picked each dog up, one by one, as if they were made of glass. The rescue boat rocked, the shark swam nearby, and the crew held rifles, watching. But no fear, no logic, not even the ocean could stop this moment. When the last dog was cradled in his arms, he whispered, "You're safe now. I promise." Back on the ship, the soldiers moved quickly, providing emergency food and blankets. They did not treat the dogs as mere animals, but as warriors, survivors, brothers. Takeshi stayed with them all night, sleeping on the floor beside their makeshift beds. When they leaned against him, trembling, he was there, and when they asked him what to do next, he had the answer. "I'll take them home." The media wanted the story. The self-defense force wanted to know where they came from. Animal protection groups called for investigations, but Takeshi didn't care about any of that. He took the dogs to his home, a small house in Hokkaido, at the foot of a quiet, safe mountain. He gave them names. Ryu, the leader. Hana, the only female, gentle yet fierce. The eldest, with a lightning-shaped scar on her hind leg. And the youngest, who never barked, silent but strong. He watched over them as they went from trembling under the table to chasing each other in the yard. They were free at last. They would not eat unless given food, but now they had learned to beg for cookies by the door. From fear to freedom, Takeshi's comrades from the self-defense force often visited. Some were amazed, others confused. They need training, strong and smart enough for the military, they said. But Takeshi always said the same thing. They have seen death up close. They've passed through hell. They owe no one anything, not even this country. They deserve peace. And that was precisely what he gave them. They became his family. Neighbors called them the Wolf Pack, and the children came to play with them. Strangers would hear their story and cry. On every anniversary of their rescue, Takeshi would take them to the beach, not the deep ocean, but a quiet stretch of sand where they could feel the wind, smell the salt, and run across the shore. Now they had something no one could take away, a second chance at life. Peace was fragile. Peace was never easy. For a time, everything seemed perfect. The 5 German shepherds had settled in, adapted to their new names, routines, and the love they received. There was sunshine, fresh air, and food that didn't smell of rust or despair. But when they looked into their eyes, especially at night, when the wind blew in a certain direction, something lingered. Yu would stand still by the door, his nose buried in sleep. Ryu, the strongest, would gaze at the sea for hours over the fence. They remembered, and they would always remember. Takeshi sensed it too. When they wagged their tails, played in the yard, or curled up beside the fireplace, he knew their story wasn't just that of rescue and recovery. There was something more that couldn't be explained in medical reports, military records, or internet searches. One day, a letter arrived. It wasn't from the government, the press, or the self-defense force. It was anonymous. There was no return address, only his name written in cautious surgical handwriting. Inside, the letter revealed one thing. They hadn't been abandoned. They had been disposed of. Along with the letter, there was a photo, an aerial shot of a dog training facility deep in the foreign woods. On the back were satellite coordinates. In the corner of the photo, 5 dogs were tied to a fence, their bones floating in the water. The same faces he had found when he first discovered them. Takeshi stared at the photo for hours, silent, unmoving, with quiet rage building in his chest. These dogs hadn't gone missing or been forgotten. They had been discarded. Someone had locked them in a container, shut the door, and let them drift into the ocean. This was not abandonment. Takeshi contacted an old source in military intelligence. A few days later, he had a file in his hands. It was blacked out, filled with classified details about a military operation, a private defense contractor operating under the Argos Protocol. This unregistered facility had been using dogs for brutal training under the guise of covert operations. The dogs were treated as assets, tools, weapons, rather than sentient beings. They were subjected to electric shocks and sleep deprivation. Takeshi's blood boiled. He had seen the darkness of war, but this was different. These creatures, born to love and protect, had been betrayed by the very hands that should have cared for them. The name on the staff list of the facility stood out: Colonel Sato. Takeshi recognized it. He had worked under Sato in Kanda Hall. Sato was a calculating man, focused more on results than human life. He had ordered biological enhancements in warfare, treating animals as expendable commodities. He had publicly spoken about removing the emotional bond from military animals. Dogs that hesitated to act out of love were considered a hindrance. Strip them of love and leave only instincts. Now everything fell into place. The facility, the cruel training, the container, the silence. It had all been a cover-up. Takeshi couldn't ignore it. He dug deeper, finding more articles, more names, former employees, and whistleblowers. Some spoke out, others were afraid. One former trainer admitted that the dogs were part of a failed experiment called the Ghost Phone Project. The aim was to create silent, emotionless, fearless dogs capable of infiltrating and conducting night operations. They were trained to be obedient to the point of self-destruction. But the project failed. The dogs didn't submit. They bonded with each other, resisting the psychological programming, and instead of attacking, they protected one another. That defiance could not be tolerated, so they were labeled as contaminated and packed into containers to be discarded. Takeshi now knew the truth. He sat on the porch, watching the dogs play. Ryu and Kuma were playfully tussling on the grass, their noses sunning in the warmth. The others watched over them. Takeshi whispered under his breath, "You refused to become monsters, and that's why you survived." He was faced with a choice: expose the truth or remain silent to protect their safety. But fate would not wait. 2 weeks later, there was an intrusion. Takeshi awoke to a low, deep growl, a growl that signaled war. He grabbed his rifle and ran to the back door, which had been broken open. Footprints, tactical gear traces. The intruders didn't expect that 5 highly trained dogs were guarding the place. They fled, but left behind a knife-slashed message on the wall. "Return them. This is your only warning." Takeshi called the local police. They conducted an investigation and wrote a report. But Takeshi understood the deeper meaning. Argos was watching. They had not forgotten the failed experiment, and now they were quietly prepared to reclaim what had been taken from them, even if it meant doing so forcibly. That night, Takeshi did not sleep. He sat outside on the porch, with his rifle resting on his knees. The dogs were quietly gathered around him, soldiers in their demeanor, but family in their loyalty. And Takeshi realized they had not been saved simply because he fed them, nor because he rescued them. They had chosen him, not because of his acts of kindness, but because, like them, he had been betrayed. He had witnessed the great cost of neutrality. He had lost those he loved. Now they stood together as one unit, one heartbeat. Takeshi began to prepare. He trained the dogs, but not for war. He trained them for defense, for safety. He reinforced the gates, installed surveillance cameras, and upgraded the perimeter of his property. He was not paranoid. He was ready. The intrusion had not just been a warning, it had been a test. And the intruders had failed. Takeshi reached out again to his old military intelligence contact, demanding information about Argos without any further concealment. What he received was horrifying. The Argos protocol was not just an illegal program, it was still active, experimenting with more dogs in other regions, eliminating those who resisted. The 5 dogs he had rescued were just a small piece of a much larger, darker story. And the world didn't know. Takeshi realized that exposing the truth wasn't just about revenge, it was about stopping them. But he had to make a choice. Was he ready to put these 5 lives in danger again to save countless others? He watched as Ryu gently licked the ear of Kuma, who rolled onto his back, gazing up at the moon. Ryu always watched over him, waiting for the next command. Takeshi then asked himself the hardest question. If I act, I might lose you all. The sun set behind the horizon, casting an orange light across the open field. The world seemed quiet, too quiet, and Takeshi knew that calm before a storm was always the most dangerous. In the past few weeks, it had felt like a countdown. The beat of a drum growing louder with each passing day, warning him that whatever was to come, there would be no turning back. That night, the dogs were restless. Yu, always vigilant, stood still, his eyes fixed on the shadows of the trees beyond the fence. Ryu, Hana, and Kuma huddled in their usual spots, but their ears twitched at every sound, every movement. They knew. They felt it coming, something they could not escape. Takeshi's instincts screamed at him to flee, to vanish with the dogs before Argos found him, before they were all consumed by the night. But he could not do that. He knew what he had to do. 2 days ago, the phone had rung. The number was anonymous, but the voice was unmistakable. Cold and sharp, it cut through the silence. By midnight, the voice warned, "If you don't return them, I'll come for them." Takeshi's heart sank. He knew who it was without needing to hear the name. Colonel Sato, the man who had nearly destroyed these dogs with his experiments, the man who had seen them as nothing more than tools, weapons, assets. Takeshi clenched his fists. "If you touch them, I swear to God." But Sato's voice interrupted him, smooth and confident, as if he held all the cards. "You're not a soldier anymore. You have no right to stop me. You're just a man with 5 dogs and a house built on lies." The insult cut deep, but it was not the words that shattered Takeshi. It was the truth behind them. What had he become? A man outside the system, fighting alone against what he had once fought for. Now, the only bonds he had were the ones he shared with 5 living beings who had entrusted their lives to him. Takeshi did not answer right away. He didn't need to. The weight of the decision pressed down on him like concrete. Midnight was near, and the voice on the other end had grown colder. "It'll be too late after this. They'll belong to us again." Takeshi ended the call, staring at the screen, his mind swirling. There was no way out. There was nowhere to hide. The wheels were already in motion, and it wasn't just his life that was at risk. It was theirs too. He thought of Ryu, remembering the first time he had met him, standing among bones and rivers, barely able to stand. But even then, in his eyes, there had been a fire, an unquenchable flame. Takeshi had seen it before, in soldiers who had fought through hell and had nothing left to lose. Ryu was not just a dog. He was a warrior, a guardian, a survivor. But the bond they shared was not out of duty. It was a bond forged in love. Takeshi knew how Ryu saw him, not for revenge, but for trust. Trust built on the knowledge that someone would give their life without hesitation. That was the truth he could never ignore. But as midnight drew closer, Takeshi realized that truth was also a weapon, one Sato would use against him. The only way to save them was to lose everything. Takeshi made his plan. The next day, he reinforced his house, reinforced the doors, set up escape routes, and made sure the dogs were ready. Hana and Yu were ready. Kuma moved quickly, always prepared to protect. Even the youngest, Kawa, was sharp and agile. But Ryu was his pillar. Takeshi knew what he had to do. To carry out the final battle, Takeshi needed Ryu. The world had forgotten the meaning of neutrality, but he had not. He had not forgotten that these 5 dogs had fought through unimaginable adversity. He could not let them return to that life. After enduring everything, when the sky began to darken, Takeshi sat with the dogs on the porch. The night air was cool, and the wind gently rustled through the trees. For a moment, everything felt normal, peaceful and safe. But Takeshi knew it was not real. A storm was coming. He just didn't know how it would arrive. Ryu sat by his side, his head resting on Takeshi's knee, his eyes alert yet calm. Hana lay on the opposite side, and Kuma curled beneath her arm. Yu stood near the fence, watching every movement in the distance. Takeshi gently stroked Ryu's fur. "You've been through too much. I don't know if I can protect you again," he said quietly. The dog looked up at him, understanding the depth of his words without a need for words. Ryu didn't fear fighting. He feared losing Takeshi. For the first time, Ryu didn't just look back at him. He leaned closer, pressing his body against Takeshi, as if the dog understood the depth of sacrifice. It was a silent moment of understanding, a promise from both sides that no matter what happened, they would face it together. Then, as if the world was preparing for war, the first gunshot rang out. Takeshi's heart raced. The dogs immediately reacted, alert, defensive, ready. They moved like soldiers who had seen hell and understood how to fight. "Stay inside," Takeshi ordered in a low, calm voice, grabbing his rifle and running toward the front of the house. From his position behind the barrier, he saw them. Two figures lurking in the shadows, moving towards the fence from the east. They wore tactical gear, the same as those who had trained dogs to be weapons. The sight of them made Takeshi's blood boil. They had come to take what wasn't theirs. They didn't understand the strength of the bond between Takeshi and the dogs. They didn't understand this connection. Takeshi didn't hesitate. He couldn't. This was the hardest decision he had ever faced. The world seemed to hold its breath. The first shadow crossed the gravel, the light from the porch casting its silhouette. The sound of metal clinking, the lightest footstep, no turning back now. Takeshi's heart raced, but his grip on the rifle was firm. He didn't need to look back. He knew the pack was with him. He heard their growls, the rustling of their fur on the floor. Ryu's low growl was the support he needed, a reminder of everything they had fought through and everything they would face together. They were no longer just dogs. They were his family. The first man entered the yard, his silhouette illuminated under the dim porch light, his face concealed by a tactical mask. He was fast, too fast, but Takeshi had seen enough of this world to know how they moved, how they reacted, and how they thought. The dogs didn't wait. Ryu was the first to leap. His massive frame tore through the air like a predator hunting its prey. The man didn't have time to react before Ryu slammed him to the ground with the force of a freight train. Hana and Kuma were right behind him, baring their teeth and moving in sync, attacking with the fury of a battle-hardened warrior. Takeshi's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the battle unfold. There was no time for hesitation. He scanned the yard, his eyes sharp and alert. A flash of movement caught his eye, and he called out to Yu, who was by the fence, locking eyes with the next threat. Yu darted from the shadows like a bolt of lightning, too fast for any man to catch. But even in the heat of the fight, Takeshi couldn't help but admire his agility. The dogs fought with an energy fueled by survival, each movement coordinated and deadly. Yu had locked onto another threat, his sharp teeth sinking into the attacker's arm. Kuma followed, his massive body slamming the man to the ground with a sickening thud. Hana joined in, her teeth tearing into the man's side, a flash of pure fury. And finally, Ryu, who had stayed with Takeshi, was ready to strike again, the pack moving as one. Takeshi felt the tension in the air as they faced the second man who appeared from the darkness. His gun was already aimed, and for a moment, Takeshi felt fear, not for himself, but for the dogs. "No!" he shouted, raising his rifle to the sky. The dogs immediately responded, leaping into action. The force of their attack was undeniable. The man barely had time to react before Ryu's jaws closed around his neck, bringing him to the ground. Yu, moving like a shadow, latched onto his arm, while Kuma and Hana attacked in unison, tearing into him. The battle was fierce, but the pack had already won. The invaders were nothing compared to the bond these dogs shared. They were no longer just tools, weapons, or animals. They were family, warriors, survivors, and the ones who had chosen each other. Takeshi had made the ultimate decision to protect them, no matter the cost. It was already over. The man had no chance. Takeshi's breath faltered, and his hands trembled, but there was no time to reflect on his anger. He watched the speed of the dogs' movements, their synchronized fighting, their unity, reminding him that they were not just survivors. They were warriors. They had been his salvation, though he had not known it, and they had protected him. The third intruder was the one Takeshi feared most, the one who would never appear in the darkness of the night, Colonel Sato. Takeshi's mind raced back to the first time he met Sato, to Afghanistan. Sato had taken so much from him: his war, his obedience, his trust in a system built on lies. Sato had pushed further, advancing more cruel tactics. His twisted vision had led to the broken souls of these 5 dogs, their past filled with pain. And now, Sato had come to finish what he had started. But Takeshi's resolve was not like it was in the past. He moved intentionally, each step calculated. As he neared the back of the house, the dogs were with him, their bodies moving in perfect synchronization. They had one purpose now: to protect what was theirs, to protect their family, to protect Takeshi. Takeshi reached the back door and looked out over the yard. There, standing in the darkness, was Sato. No words were necessary. His presence alone spoke volumes. He held his rifle as if this was just another routine, his experience and posture calm, confident as though he had already won. But Takeshi was not afraid, and he knew his dogs were not afraid either. "It's over," Takeshi said in a low, controlled voice. Sato laughed, a cold, soulless laugh. "Do you think you saved them, Yamada?" Sato mocked. "Do you not understand? These are not your dogs, not pets, tools. If you think you can protect them, that's delusion. They've always been mine." And now, Takeshi was the one who would win. Without saying a word, Ryu charged. The next few moments passed like a blur. Ryu snarled, bared his teeth, and with his massive frame, he blocked any escape, charging towards Sato. Sato tried to raise his weapon, but Ryu was too fast, too strong. The force of Ryu's body collided with Sato, throwing him to the ground. The other dogs joined in. Hana, Yu, Kuma all moved as one, attacking with the precision of a well-trained unit. But they were not fighting just to survive. They were fighting for freedom, for the right to be loved, for the right to never return to the hell they had once been dragged out of. They fought for the right to never be controlled again. Sato struggled, but Ryu held him down with a deep growl. The man's rifle was kicked away and rendered useless. Takeshi moved slowly, never taking his eyes off the scene. No words were needed, and no further violence was required. Sato's plan was shattered, and his control over these dogs was finally broken. The dogs stood together, watching as Sato was taken away. There was no need to kill him. Takeshi was not that kind of person. What mattered was the victory. They had won. They had taken their lives back. Takeshi knelt down and looked into Ryu's eyes. The eyes that had seen so much, that had survived, that never gave up. "You are free," Takeshi whispered. And for the first time, Ryu lowered his head, quietly acknowledging that peace had finally arrived. Takeshi looked at the other dogs, Hana, Yu, Kuma. They all stood tall, but there was a quiet joy in their posture. It was a joy that only those who had arrived at a safe place could truly understand. They had survived the worst, and by standing together they had grown stronger. The storm had passed, and the family, had lived. In the days that followed, Takeshi Yamada continued to fight, not with weapons but with love, to make the world aware of what had happened to these dogs, so no one would ever do this to them again. The world may have forgotten the value of neutrality, but Takeshi and his pack proved that love was the greatest weapon of all, and it would protect them forever. The lesson here is simple. There are no limits to love. The world may forget the true meaning of neutrality, but we do not have to. Even the smallest acts of kindness in the darkest moments can become the seed of revolution. These dogs weren't just saved. They chose to trust, chose to survive, and in doing so, reminded us of the strength to stand for love, neutrality, and justice. If this story has inspired you and made you realize that kindness still matters in this world, please subscribe and comment. Every life matters. Every click, every comment reminds us that there are still souls out there, and together we can make a difference. Thank you for being a part of this journey.